There we are.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we will convene our meeting. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I am not aware of any minutes. Holly, where are we with minutes? Do you know?
Let's see. I actually can't access my drive right now. Let me take a look and see what's posted on the webpage. I do have draft minutes posted for our last meeting, November 17th, 2021. I can email those to everybody in just a moment.
Okay. Well, let's I would suggest some amendments to our agenda, which would be the eliminations of numbers 6 and 7, which are redundant. And if we need to adopt minutes, we can do that after our discussion. Would you like to make a motion, Karen? Or?
Sure. So I'll make a motion to approve and adopt the agenda with the following changes: elimination of items 6 and 7, and reserving the opportunity to discuss minutes. Although all three of us are not here, but if that's the desire of the chair, then we can make that change later. But for now, motion to approve and adopt the agenda with the elimination of items 6 and 7. I'll move.
Thank you. I'll second that. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous, and we've adopted our agenda. So welcome, and wonder if we maybe want to introduce ourselves. We're going to have a presentation of the public arts policy. I actually was talking with Doreen, Karen, when you were also calling me about the same thing. It is it's a large document that can't be digested thoroughly in an hour. And so I don't think we're looking for adoption at this meeting, but this will begin the process. We'll see where we are after the presentation. And at least when it comes to council, we'll be familiar with it, and we can decide if we individually want to sponsor this, if we want it to come back to committee. We can figure that out as a next step, but I don't think we're looking to do that necessarily today. So do you want to introduce the City Arts team, Doreen, that is presenting? Or
sure. Should I let people do that themselves, or do you want me to summarize it?
Yeah, we can all introduce ourselves. I'm Joan Shannon. I represent the South District on the City Council.
Well, I don't know I know where I am on my screen with all of the nice boxes. I'm not
randomly. Whoever
right,
hits unmute, go.
Right. I'm not second, but I'll go second. So I'm Karen Paul, City Councilor, Ward 6. Joan and I share Ward 6, and she has the other side on Ward 5 as well.
And Holly is our staff person.
Taking minutes. I'm Holly Bushnell, city staffer. I'm primarily at Lakeview Cemetery, but taking minutes for this meeting.
Thank you very much, Holly. Holly is the glue of it all. Colin?
And I'm Colin Storrs. I'm the new BCA Public Art and Grants Program Specialist. A relatively new position that's just been created to help steward public art. Great.
Thank you. Welcome. That's exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Doreen, I think you're well known to everybody here.
Hope so at this point.
And
Otherwise,
Sarah.
ghost you.
Uh,
Patrick is probably not known to this team. Patrick?
Hi, I'm Patrick Shank. I joined the BCA Board of Advisors about a year ago, and I'm the new chair of the Public Art Committee. I'm also on our Equity and Belonging Committee. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. And from here, I think, and hi, Sarah. I think you're also well known to everybody here. Yeah, we can go into the presentation. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I did plan to spend some time really reading the whole document, and I started to, but I got interrupted and it didn't, I did not finish. I didn't get very far, honestly. So I'm looking forward to being informed by the presentation.
Great. Well, with that in mind, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Joan, I kind of echo your sentiment. Like, it is a lengthy document and it is going to take some time to digest. So what you're going to see here now is really just kind of a level set and a brief overview of how we got to where we are now. So with that in mind, I'll kind of launch into it. As you probably know, BCA has had an arts and public places program since 1990, and guidelines were established at that time for commissioning new works of public art. Under those guidelines, however, funding for the public art projects were established on a case-by-case basis. Those earlier guidelines also did not address responsibility for the maintenance of public art, which rested with various city departments. And the guidelines also did not include a formal policy for deaccessioning public artworks. In June of 2021, the City Council passed the Percent for Public Art Ordinance, which sets aside 1% of eligible capital project budgets for public art, which are funded wholly or in part by the City of Burlington. The ordinance also provides for the administration and governance of the Percent for Public Art policy and the development of public art projects in general through the establishment of what the ordinance calls the Art in Public Places Guidelines and Policies. This next slide talks a bit about how these guidelines were generated. Per the ordinance, the BCA Board of Advisors is responsible for creating and overseeing the new guidelines. And members of BCA's Public Art Committee worked with Sarah Katz to produce the draft guidelines that were circulated, I believe, yesterday in advance of this meeting. The draft guidelines are modeled on established Percent for Public Art programs from across the country, and they reflect the feedback of several stakeholders, really. Eileen Blackwood, the previous city attorney, worked pretty hard on these to ensure that the guidelines align with other city policies. A more recent review was actually undertaken by City Attorney Haley McClenahan, and she's provided some comments. BCA has also shared a draft of the guidelines with members of other city departments, including the Department of Public Works, Parks and Rec, and Planning. The guidelines cover a few key areas to fulfill the requirements that are set forth in the ordinance, and I wanted to take some time just to summarize those for the city councilors on this call now. The first requirement that was set forth in the ordinance has to do with the criteria for selection and placement of the city's public art, including standards for the solicitation of artists. The second requirement is meant to ensure representation by artists who reflect cultural, racial, and ethnic diversity. The third requirement is to ensure that there are standards for sufficient funding for the continuing care and maintenance of the city's public art. Unlike the earlier version of the guidelines that we currently operate under, the new guidelines will provide procedures for acquiring and deaccessioning the city's public art. And finally, the new guidelines will include a process for public input and the selection of members to serve on artist selection juries. So our next steps, given where the guidelines are today, and why we're kind of meeting today, is we'd like to get some further feedback and comment from the Park Arts and Culture Committee. Barring any further questions or comments, BCA will make a motion to approve these guidelines at its next full board meeting. And then we'll decide how to make a formal recommendation to the City Council to formally approve these guidelines. And so that's kind of where we are today. And I would just open it up to any questions from anybody on this call, really, at this time.
Karen, I don't know how much you had a chance to review the document, or if you have specific questions.
Well, I do have one, Joan, just so that I understand in terms of the presentation. So you've said feedback from PAC, and then the BCA board would approve guidelines. So the first thing is, when is the BCA board meeting that you're planning on doing that? When, like, what is the date?
Sarah, Doreen, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're targeting the end of May.
Yes, I think our May board meeting would be scheduled for May 17th.
Okay. All right. Because I think it, I'm glad to hear that, because I was afraid that you might say it's April 5th.
Right.
And, I think we're probably, we're only 2 people. And, I think it would be only fair if you're getting feedback from PAC, that it also be whoever is on PAC in a week and a half or so. And of course, Ali is not here either. And I know this is important to all of us. So I did have a chance to go through this. One of the things that did strike me, if you go to your second, well, you've got 5, I guess you've got 5 in there. So I'm not sure, maybe it's 4 or 3. Let's see. I guess what I have, and I'm sure that all of you have heard, is that when you talk about the next slide, not the inputs, but the next one about, guideline summaries, all of the guidelines, the draft guideline, or the ones that you look to, like, for example, San Jose, I don't know, was Philadelphia one of them? I can't remember now, but of the ones that you looked at, did any of them talk, when you talk about public art, did any of them talk about public art that isn't just visual arts, but is either, audio, performative, performance-based? Is there, was there any discussion in any of those other ones that you look to in developing, as look through it to some degree as a template to see what other cities are doing? Or was it just, was it just defined as public art, meaning art that is visual and permanent?
A lot of the cities that we were looking at for guidance were also associated with capital funding. So, I don't typically think of public art as specific to the visual arts, because I say all the time that artistry can come from many different artistic disciplines, but the function of the work in a public space does require a certain amount of technical expertise that we hope will always be in any artist team that presents an artistic concept, because it has, you know, have safety standards and concerns about durability and maintenance that we're taking into account as well. Similar things that any capital project will be looking to address when dealing with the similar sources of funding. So they tend to be capital-based projects. And, you know, cities manage their art programs differently all over the country. Temporary public art is absolutely a type of programming. It's also more operational as opposed to capital in nature. So it's really just, you know, making sure that you're aligning the resources to manage various types of programming with whatever you're presenting as your guidelines, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the, you know, I certainly understand that. And when you think of capital, you think of something that is, doesn't have to be there forever, but because certainly we all know that, I mean, even BCA, you may have some artwork that's on the walls that has been there since you took over the firehouse, but there's plenty that is obviously not, visiting exhibits, et cetera. I guess what I'm wondering is whether or not there is the opportunity to do something that is other than, I mean, like, for example, I mean, you know, and this, again, just an example, you know, the being able to go into, you know, into a building and have a thing where it's a display, but there's audio involved. You go up to something, you look at
absolutely.
it, you're looking at something that is audio, not just visual, but audio.
Sure, absolutely.
Is there opportunities for something that allows for, I don't know, you know, someone who's a storyteller or someone, you know, I think those are the, I think we want to make sure, like, for example, you said, you know, talking about artists representing cultural, racial, and ethnic, you know, broad perspectives. You know, we try not to use the word diversity because diversity implies diverse from what, and so we try not to use that word as much as I think many of us have often used that word. But in general, is there a way for that to be, you know, artists representing cultural, racial, ethnic, and you know, and different types of art, because again, maybe it's in the 21 pages that I haven't fully read yet. If it is, tell me so, and I will put those comments to rest for now.
Well, I think we did try to address that in the definition of art, which is very broad and all-encompassing, and intentionally speaks to multimedia artworks, and certainly that is the trend and interest of contemporary artists, many frequently, to incorporate multiple disciplines into their work. So I absolutely agree.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no intention to discourage any type of artist from participating in public art.
All right. Well, when I look at the PDF that is attached and I download it and I do my find, I will look under multimedia or look on you know, art and see where that is, because I have you know, full disclosure, I have not read 21 pages of this since yesterday.
Completely fine. Absolutely. We know this is just a first meeting and an informational launch, and we're just looking to get a conversation started with you.
Okay. All right. That's my question, Joan. Go ahead.
Thank you.
You know, I would just add one build there if I could. You know, it's, you know, some of the guidelines that our current draft were modeled on, they really take this same idea that % for public art projects, you know, at least the way that BCA is envisioning them, are really defined in part by their intent to shape our public spaces. And that's why, you know, the public art projects that these guidelines are really geared towards are, you know, really intended for visual arts installations rather than performing arts, which are obviously, that can be considered public art too in certain contexts, but they're ultimately more, you know, ephemeral in nature, and they don't really share the same goal of enriching our city's, you know, public buildings and public spaces. So that's just some additional context of how we're looking at public art through the percent for public art.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think that when we think about public spaces, it doesn't mean that we don't think about places for those things to occur, but the inputs that create those places are not typically created by artists. They're created by, you know, other professionals that make sure that, you know, we have the right kinds of electrical requirements on site and the right kinds of data requirements on site, and the lighting is sufficient and those kinds of things, which it has a different, it's just a different set of skills than what artists who are brought in specifically to create artwork are doing for our public spaces.
Well, great. I mean, if I just might, Joan, I guess what I'm thinking is there's film. There is, you know, film is not permanent, but I mean, film is something where you walk in and you could see a film while you are in a public space. You know, while you can't see 24/7, you know, a band performing around, you know, all during the day, every day, maybe you could see different, so to speak, bands performing. Can you see films of that? Can you see, you know, and so that it doesn't necessarily have to be live. It could be something other than that. I think what I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, you know, there's lots of art out there. Doreen knows this. Not sure if I necessarily should capture this at a city meeting, so now that everybody knows. But I was a studio art major for about 10 minutes in college until
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that either.
Wow. No wonder
I'm a bit of a frustrated artist, and I thought I had some level of talent until I got into college and found out that I really didn't. That most people who do this for a living are a whole lot more talented than I am, which is why I'm a little bit of a person who sits in from the side and looks at all of the offerings in the BCA catalog, because maybe someday I will do all of those things. But you know, so I do spend, I mean, I'm a lover of the arts, and I do think it's important that if we're going to be a community that is giving this kind of money, and potentially it could be a significant amount of money, that we are really doing our best, even if it involves bending over backwards, to make sure that every art form is represented. And if it's something where there's an art form that can't be as easily represented in something that kind of permanent, that we figure out another way for them to still be represented. So,
Yep.
you know, that's really my shtick, and that's all I have to say.
I think an important thing to add to, Karen, is this is one source of funding towards a project. There's so many different other avenues through which public art is funded and supported, and can be temporary and temporal and ephemeral, and be realized in a city. This particular ordinance and this particular description is for permanent art. So it's one piece of the puzzle of what is possible. And I think, you know, when you think about it, probably a lot of funding in the next period is going to come from DPW. The 1% that you talk about being significant is probably DPW. It's going to be roads, and there'll be a roundabout, and there'll be a corner on a street. And the intention of that public space will be how the public engages with that space. And it will kind of lead and define what probably the artist will think about creating that's going to be specific to that particular area. And, you know, I remember in the last round of projects for our downtown center, I love calling it new names every week, there were a number of pieces that had multimedia components of the projects. And, you know, it goes back to what Sarah was talking about. There's such a significant then team that comes together to realize something like that, because you've got engineers who are figuring how to incorporate that. There's people who are thinking through the safety. How is this going to survive in a winter landscape? What happens when the soundtrack breaks down and you can no longer hear the poet reading? You know, all of those things being considered. So they get very specific to the space that is being offered for that 1% to be applied to. Yeah.
Thank you all. We were supposed to go to public forum before discussion. So I want to check in. I see in the attendees, we have Cindy White and James Lockridge. Can we make them panelists? Great. And hi, Jim.
Hello, everybody.
Did you want to weigh in on public comment?
Yes, thank you. I have a few questions. And I also want to provide some comments to the discussion so far. This ordinance takes all of the potential funding for the arts from capital projects and does not steer it toward capital projects for the performing arts, whether that's infrastructure for stages, public bulletin boards, improvements to bandstands, new contexts for art to be shared publicly in a material way. And it avoids discussion about that specifically and seemingly consciously. I'm stepping into this conversation with the sense that this ordinance is not ethical and that it is not complete in its inclusion of the arts that should be served. It's one thing to say that an artful something will be paid for, created, and owned by the city. It's another to take capital supports and invest them in the environment that will allow public art to flourish in all of its possibilities. And one of the things that catches my attention in the ordinance is the notation that the city may encourage other projects that are not capital projects to contribute to the % for Public Art Fund as appropriate. That's a quote from the ordinance. So this ordinance encourages or allows the city to not just take all of this capital support, but even eventually other supports and channel it in the same direction away from infrastructure for the performing arts. I don't think it's fair to pursue developing guidelines to implement this ordinance when the ordinance itself is faulty in that it serves a special interest and not all arts interests, when it could with minor alterations. If something in this ordinance said funding from this source will channel into the city-owned infrastructure for the performing arts, small scale or large, we all know we have the need for that, yet we aren't addressing it. By saying that there are other sources of funding, you're holding this question at arm's length irresponsibly. BCA is looked to as our arts office. Arts office should mean all arts. If BCA at this moment were creating paid positions to pursue supports, consistent sustained funding supports for the performing arts parallel to this ordinance, then we wouldn't need this conversation. But we aren't being responsible to all the artists of our city by implementing this ordinance the way we're talking about it. And I put my questions into the chat. They're very specific, they're concise, and they're for our city councilors. And I think until those questions are answered by our city councilors, we aren't going to be on a firm, responsible footing to pursue the guidelines that this meeting's about. And this, of course, is a conversation I invite with everybody. This is a policy-oriented interest, and it's one that is arising from a set of values that I think you all understand are meant to be inclusive. So I'm going to imagine there's a path forward that's positive-minded and productive for everybody involved. Moving forward with the ordinance as it's written without consideration of the performing arts and integration of the performing arts would be an error, I think, in judgment for all of us. Thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you, Jim. I have a question for all of you, which is, what do you, how do you evaluate public art? Like, what are we seeing around the country in commonality in the best public art projects? And what do you see as some of Burlington's best public art projects, and what makes them really good public art projects?
Everybody is going to have a slightly different answer.
I would expect.
I like a lot of different types of public art for different reasons. So it's hard to say, here's what is really fabulous and here's what's less fabulous. But I think that, I think that artwork that engages the public, that's the end goal of art in public places. It's less about the artist and the artist vision, and more about how the artist comes together with the public, whether that's through the process of creating the work and then telling that story of where that engagement happened, or whether that's through how the work exists in public space and encourages people to be a part of the work itself. Those are the ones that I think are most exciting to me when they're really about engagement and the human experience with the work.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for being brave enough to go first. Who wants to go next? I'm not as trained in art as Karen is, because I missed 10 minutes in college.
Oh, well.
So
okay.
I would honestly like to be educated about, like, I have my opinions too. But
Remember, I said I was a studio art major for 10 minutes.
and I said I missed that 10 minutes.
Okay, all righty.
So Doreen, what do you see as some of the best public art, your favorite projects? What makes it good public art? Which might be different than what makes it good art.
Yeah, so I think the engagement piece is the most exciting part, which I don't think has anything to do with whether you love or hate something. I remember when we did the project at the shopping plaza on Shelburne Road, Leslie Fry's, and there were people who thought this was the best thing they had seen in 100 years. And there were people who came to me, including some of our board members and friends, who said, how did you ever let something like this happen? And those conversations that were so diametrically opposed were the rich fabric of discussions for a long time. Probably still today, I don't hear as much, but at that time, you couldn't shop at Price Chopper without having that conversation. So I loved the dialogue that came out of it. And, you know, I think Sarah hit the nail on the head in terms of that public piece with the conversation between the artist and community in the making. And I think some of the best art reflects back on the understanding that comes out of, in other words, not just the coming to a project with your idea, but what that space says to you and what the intention of the creation of the work is going to be, and how well it's interpreted by the artist or the team of artists, the team of designers, the musicians, the architects, the landscape folks. So, you know, it's as rich as the people who participate. And you know, when I think about Burlington, I think we have some extraordinary public art, and I think we have room for now the creation of, in the next 10 years, an opportunity to look with an eye towards what else do we want to see? What can that public landscape, that place of community gathering, offer that's going to talk about our time, perhaps reflect back on history, and project in the public imagination what's possible in the future. Dewey Park is coming up, a major project that we did with REIB. And I think there's going to be a lot of delight and a lot of cheering for that piece. I think we have that opportunity often, and these guidelines really simply kind of make sure that the process is equitable, that it's done well, and that the end result is something that can be sustained, maintained, and if necessary, at some point in history, decommissioned. And just understanding all the rules that we sign on to when the work is created. I think there's a lot of communities who are really in the United States right now that are looking at their public art very differently. Because there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of public art that are being decommissioned, deaccessioned, because of their racist history. And it's a painful moment in many a city's life. Yeah, just thought for the
Just say
moment.
that Price Chopper sculpture, I probably felt both of those things. I thought it was spectacular when I first saw it, and then the birds came and I was horrified. Anybody else want to share there?
I'll share a little bit. I mean, I would echo everything that Sarah and Doreen mentioned. I think well-executed public art can do a lot of things. You know, it can designate places for celebration in our city. It can, you know, raise the public's appreciation for art and awareness for our city's commitment to issues like racial equity. It can teach people about our local culture and heritage. You know, it can really contribute to our local economy too. You know, good public art attracts visitors. It can really be an engine for economic development. So when I think about public art, especially in our public spaces and buildings, that's kind of the impact that I'm looking for. And when you walk around Burlington, you know, some pieces do stand out and you recognize them as important places in our city. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Thanks. Anybody else?
I have a question, but not that.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm just curious to know, when you talk about like the roundabout, where you're talking about some of the other, you know, and you said a lot of it will come from DPW. So the roundabout is not paid for by the city. The roundabout is a state project. To be honest with you, I should know the answer to this, but it's changed so many times that I don't know. I know that originally it was going to be about 6 million. I think it was going to be more than, I think it is going to end up being more than that. I mean, we first started thinking about this was back in like, I don't know, 2011 or 9 or 8 or 7. I mean, it was a long time ago. Are you talking about 1% of that?
That's
Because
not an
it-
eligible project, unfortunately,
Okay.
because the funding source is not eligible.
Okay.
And it wasn't agreed upon before the funding source was accepted. Actually, that's a good point that we meant to mention, which is that, for example, at the airport, the ordinance is what allows us to use funding for artwork that would, that the airport allows the airport to use funding for artwork that would not have been possible without the local law and regulation in place. So it makes new sources available that wouldn't have previously been available.
So right now, as you know, all of the projects that are done at the airport are almost completely FAA funded.
Yep.
They're working on a very large project right now.
Mhm.
If that project were to be done 2 years from now, so it's not there now, it's
Yep.
going to get done 2 years from now, would that be included?
Yes.
So a $27 million project that is not being paid for by the city would be included. Now it'd be $270,000.
Yep.
It would go towards public art. In
Yep.
the same way that if the roundabout were started in 2027 and not already started, that would not be included.
I don't know enough about VTrans funding to know if that would make a difference or not. I think our goal is to try to include public art as a line item when we're submitting for grants so that it can be approved or not approved at the time of award. And it was not part of the Shelburne Roundabout project in the beginning. I don't know how that would play out, if it was to be redone in the future. Whatever happens at the Shelburne Roundabout will be independent of the budget of that entire project. Whatever happens for public art, I should say, would be independent of the rest of that project.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I used it is because somebody mentioned it. And so I was thinking, what if it had started 2 years from now and wasn't already underway? Would that be included? Because when you talk about projects like that, you're talking about a lot of money. I mean, we're talking about potentially in some construction years, not all of them, but you're certainly talking about the potential to raise $500,000, maybe more, maybe less. I mean, there are going to be years where there's going to be less construction that goes on. There's going to be less, there's going to be less buildings. I mean, it ebbs and flows. But I think what's important to appreciate is that we are potentially talking about a significant investment. And that is why I think it's important that we have that it encompasses public art for all of what public art could be defined as. So
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Thanks.
Karen, for example, with the airport, and we're working with them right now on the new building, they're finding money to put, even though that building didn't have the 1% because we didn't have the ordinance. And Jean had been promoting with us to get that ordinance passed as soon as we possibly could so we could get under the wire, and it just wasn't possible because of the timeline in the city attorney's office. But when you speak to working with a funding source, the 1% is what allows them to go to the FAA and to get that committed. But then it's got a whole separate set of rules of how that has to be used it has to be in the airport. It has to further the passenger experience. It has a whole other set of guidelines that then we would have to live by and a different set of parameters of who are making decisions about the public art,
Got it.
right? As
Makes
the
sense.
source is different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Question. Can you tell me do you know what's happening? One of my favorite public art pieces, probably my #1 favorite public art piece in Burlington, is the file cabinets.
Oh, really? I should know that. You're so close to where you are. Yeah.
And I wonder, do you know, does that have a place within, I know
Yeah.
that a foundation has been built for it where it is. Is it just staying where it is for now? Is there,
It got moved. It's moved.
it got moved a while ago. It's not to
Yeah,
its
it got-
foundation, right? Where
It
it's-
got a new foundation and it got moved. Was it last fall? God, I've lost
Yeah.
track of which
Yeah,
fall it
it's
was.
last fall.
Last fall, yeah. So it's in its permanent location now, which is now on the property owned by, what is it, 207 Flynn Ave? It's the building that is right next to it, the Select Design Building.
Yeah,
It's owned by the property owners are Select Designs property owners.
okay. Well, what I like about that is I like the historical nature of it, and I like that it puzzles people. And I like that it's on maps and tourists come to take their pictures next to the
Mhm.
file cabinets. It's kind of this obscure thing. And I'm not sure how much they actually even understand why they're taking pictures of themselves next to the file cabinets. I always thought it should be updated to have, you know, the appropriate number of file cabinets. It should be much taller than it actually
Oh,
is.
you should hear her ideas, Joan. She is so clever about the future of this piece.
Oh, good. Well, I hope that, yeah, is something that can continue to grow over the years. I think that that's really appealing about it as well. But I wanted to hear your ideas because I want to kind of keep that in mind as I'm reading this policy. I appreciate what Jim said and his vision. I think that there are different opportunities in different locations, and we have to be cognizant that a process of building diverse art forms, it doesn't happen in a project. It happens over the course of time. And I hope that the policy is broad enough so that we can take advantage of the various opportunities that might arise to build, you know, to build a variety of art forms throughout the city. I've also heard from constituents, they particularly like things that are publicly interactive, that you can engage, you can physically kind of engage with it in some way.
Mhm.
So thank you all for the discussion, and I will, you know, dig in and read the document. I think we're going to need to have another, I told you, I definitely need to go. And but we'll need to have another PAC meeting about this, I think. And hopefully, you know, whoever, I'll leave it to you, Doreen, to connect with whomever is the next chair of PAC, whether it's me or somebody else or a monitor. I don't really know. But I do appreciate this discussion, and we'll keep all of this in mind as I read the document.
Yeah, may I just take one moment if everyone still has a moment here? There was a request, oh my gosh, it's now probably a year old, maybe not that long, from Ali, when the North Street Studios were closing, for us to try to find a way to create a public resource for the community. And I'm really proud to say, and Colin, if you would share your screen with everyone, I want to show you what's now up and operating both on BCA's website, but also most importantly on Love Burlington. And this is a listing of all of the community venues. And if you could go down, Colin, just to sort of show the way that it's, so you can sort throughout the community all of the different by, does it have a stage? Are there chairs? What's the rent? Do they have a piano? And there's a contact for each of these community rooms, so that whether you want to teach a class in martial arts, or you want to, musicians want to rehearse, or community supper, you can look through and make a choice and have the contacts, so that you don't have to call 20 and 30 people to figure out actually how to get to the best place to meet your needs. So we're really, really proud of this. It took a little while. It's an interactive database, and I think Ali's going to be happy. Well, I mean, we all should be happy. It's a great resource.
That is awesome. I have to sign off. Thank you for sharing that, Doreen. And thank you to everyone for coming and presenting this to us. The discussion will continue.
Thank you, everyone.
You want to, you're without objection, you're adjourning?
Yeah, we didn't adopt the minutes, but that was the meeting we appointed the dog park, or the dog task force. So I think that should wait for, I don't have time to read it, so that can wait till the next meeting.
Okay.
Jim, I see your hand up, but we need to end the meeting. Did you have something really brief to say?
Yes,
Awesome.
this ordinance patronizes some artists without contributing to infrastructure that would empower many or all artists. And that is an opportunity cost to the city. Earlier, Patrick and Karen brought into the conversation the value of public art. So if we're going to think in those terms, we need to think broadly in those terms and consider this.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thanks for coming tonight.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Night.